Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about the Revolutionary War, focusing on the earlier northern part of the war, which happens mostly in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and happens primarily from 1776 to 1778. Here are your goals. Make sure that you write down the definitions to these vocabulary words on the left, and answer the two questions on the right. You don't have to write down the rest of the stuff. Just the answers to these things that you see here. Alright, so in 1776, America has declared independence, and it's prepared for a full-scale war with Great Britain. The British are ready for war, and the main British general, his name is General Howe, is preparing to invade New York with an army of 30,000. Washington knows that this is where the British are likely to strike, and so he sets up his defenses on Long Island, basically hoping to protect New York City from the British invasion. General Howe invades Long Island with a huge army, much larger than the American army, defeats Washington, and is able to capture New York City. Washington, even though he is beaten, he is able to save his army and retreat into New Jersey. So this is a bad start for the Americans, but at least Washington gets away and can keep fighting. Even though Washington was beaten at the first battle on Long Island, he is ready to make a comeback. His army is weakened, but they are still ready to fight. It just means that they need to rely on surprise if they're going to win battles, because the main British army is way stronger. And so his first sneak attack, Washington's, happens on Christmas of 1776. And this is in a New Jersey town called Trenton. Here, a little ways south of New York City, Washington on Christmas evening crosses the Delaware and is able to attack a British force there. Basically, the British soldiers spent Christmas hanging out and eating and drinking and are basically ready to fall asleep. And when the Americans show up on Christmas, they're not ready, and the Americans are able to defeat them pretty easily. At this point, the Americans post up in Trenton, but it's not long before a British army comes down from New York, and the Americans are forced to retreat. But rather than just running away, Washington runs north to another British location, the town of Princeton. And once he gets there, he is able to surprise those British soldiers and defeat them as well. So, at the end of 1776, in spite of his initial defeat at Long Island, Washington is able to win 2 victories, and this boosts American spirits as the year closes. So basically, Americans, even though things are hard, they're ready to keep fighting. So when fighting resumes in 1777, after the winter, which most armies kind of chill out during the winter, they don't keep fighting during January and February. But in the spring of 1777, General Howe sets out to capture the major American city of Philadelphia. This is a really important city because it is the capital of the United States, and it is where the Second Continental Congress is meeting, which functions basically as the government of the United States. So Howe thinks that if he can capture Philadelphia, then he will be able to end the war. Washington's army, even though it won a couple victories, is still too weak to stop the British advance. And so the British are able to take Philadelphia by the fall of 1777. But even though they capture the capital city, Washington's army refuses to stop fighting. And soon the British are forced to abandon the city in order to defend New York City. So Washington's still running around, still on the loose, and the British thought the war was going to be over. But after this, they realized that they can't just win the war by capturing important cities. As long as the Americans are willing to fight, and as long as Washington remains uncaptured, the war is going to go on. While this is going on down in Philadelphia, there is something else going on up north. The British have sent another army down from Canada, and this army is supposed to march down from Canada into New York. And basically, their main job is to meet up with forces from the south and to cut off all of New England from the rest of the United States. And the idea here is that by doing this, it will weaken the United States and maybe allow the British to win the war. But this doesn't really work out. What happens is the British are marching down from Canada, and in between Canada and New York, there's a lot of wilderness. Basically, mountains and forests, and basically where you don't want to take an army. But they do it anyway. They march into this wilderness, and the Americans figure out what's going on. And the Americans are able to surround and destroy this British army that's marching down from Canada. And this is a huge defeat. The British lose basically an entire chunk of their army. And because of this defeat, the British attempt to cut off New England is put to an end. And the French learn about this victory and decide that that they should join in and help the Americans to defeat the British. So this is basically a huge win because it convinces the French that the Americans are ready to fight, and that the Americans can actually win this battle against the British. And so the French sign on, and they start sending ships and soldiers and guns to help the Americans out. And so basically, after the Battle of Saratoga, this is things aren't looking so good for the British anymore. Alright, that's it for your video today. Please make sure that you define these terms and that you write down the answers to these questions.